Dirty Harry's Place used to be my favorite film blog. No other choice. Blogger John Nolte weighed in on all things Hollywood, and he did so from a conservative, right-leaning perspective. Lots of feisty opinions, lots of interesting conversations there. I was hooked, and I wasn't alone. The blog eventually caught the eye of Andrew Breitbart, who hired John to oversee Hollywood content at Breitbart News. And that's where John's been ever since. He did have a brief tenure at the Daily Wire, but Breitbart News lured him back, and that really is his home away from home. No one writes like John. No one. His words are brutal, uncompromising, smart, and of course, always funny. He doesn't even think about pulling punches, and he eviscerates Disney and what they're doing in the culture wars like no one else. You almost feel sorry for Disney. Almost. But just as importantly, when John loves a movie, he wraps his arms around it and he writes in a way that makes you feel it with every sentence. That's why I read everything John writes. Everything. Politics, entertainment, culture, big tech, you name it. Few people love great movies like John does, and he knows just how to say it. I still didn't realize he had a great book in him. That book is called Borrowed Time, and it follows Joshua Mason, who's a man who's cursed with immortality. Yeah, it's a curse. Now, he keeps his amazing powers a secret from the entire world, but he also knows that no matter how close he gets to someone, a friend, a companion, a lover, he or she is going to die right before his eyes, because Joshua never does. It's a great starting point for a story, no doubt, and John's writing is just as powerful as his Hollywood reporting. Borrowed Time brims with imagination, great characters, again, a lot of laughs, and some really meaty themes you'll be thinking about when you close the book each night. This is a book by a conservative artist. It is not a conservative book per se. There are no sermons, no lectures. It's just great storytelling. But Borrowed Time just gave me an excuse to get John back on the show. He talks more about the book, what inspired it, why he thinks he might be a one-and-done novelist, which I'm not too happy to hear, but it is a great book, so I'm glad he got it out into the public. But he also talks about the woke mind virus and why he thinks it's changing. I think what he has to say on the subject might surprise you. Here's the one and only, and I don't say that loosely, John Nolte. John, so good to have you back on the show. Now, obviously, you've been covering Hollywood for such a long time now. You directed an indie comedy called Beautiful Loser. Why a novel at this point in your career? I'm curious about that transition because this is such a, there's so much work you can tell behind this story. And also, just writing anything at this complexity, it ain't easy. You've got a full-time job, obviously. So what was the point, the trigger that made this possible?
It just got under my skin. I had been, as a mental exercise, not really thinking about ever writing it. You're laying in bed at night, or you're on a long drive or something, and I'm someone that doesn't like to look at the phone all the time. I think boredom is a good thing, and it's just it makes you think, and that's important. So I went through this mental exercise where I think to myself, well, what would it be like to be immortal? Not a superhero, not a vampire, not someone special like the Highlander series, just an everyday guy like me. What would that be like? And I ended up asking myself three questions. What would it be like logistically to try to remain hidden in a country like ours, in a culture like ours, where you can sort of feel the government closing in on you with digital money and social security numbers and all the cameras? How would you stay hidden? And the second question I asked myself is, what would it be like emotionally to know that if you live forever, you're going to watch everything you love die? And then the third question I asked myself was, where does it end? How do you end? If you're going to live forever, what happens when the universe ends? What happens at the very end of time? And then I ended up answering those questions. And again, it was still a mental exercise, but then I came up with the idea that he could sell his life. My protagonist, Joshua Mason, could sell his life, and that would be his renewable resource that he could make money with. And then it went from an idea to a concept, and I thought, well, that's pretty good. That's interesting. So I started writing it as a screenplay in 2016, which wasn't a very good idea because I'm not a very good screenwriter. But over 5 years trying to punch out the screenplay, I came up with the story. And then I realized I would have to write it using not a screenplay, but prose as a novel. So about It took me about 2 years after that to write out the whole novel.
Wow. And you mentioned a movie, a screenplay. To me, I think that a limited series would probably do this story the best justice because there's so much in there. There's so many twists and turns, and I don't think you want to compress it into a movie. I just think the way it ended up is that format might be better. As I'm reading it, I'm thinking, gosh, I see a little bit of Stephen King here. Almost visually, there's a Tarantino vibe at times, although not the derivative kind of stories that Tarantino often inspires. Did you have a vision for the tone of the book when you started? You've got the idea. You mentioned how it all came to be, but when the atmosphere, the feel of the book, did you have that in mind, or did it just flow from the story?
The atmosphere that I had was really a Western, because I don't read fiction, so I don't have what people would call literary influences.
Mhm.
And when I started writing this book, I had to learn how to write. I had to learn how to write fiction. I've never even tried to write fiction like this before, so I had to start from scratch. How do you do this? How do you convey someone's thoughts? But it was really the Western, the idea of the loner, the guy alone who's sort of pushed into having to take action.
Mhm.
Setting is in the Southwest, and so I think that was really the mood and tone that I was looking for. The Searchers, those Man Alone movies that
Yeah.
Robert Redford made so many of in the like Jeremiah Johnson in the 70s, just that sort of vibe.
Yeah, I mean, I think the character and the predicament here, it just screams out loneliness. And obviously there are a lot of layers to that, but that's one of the critical themes here. There's so much I'm loving about the book. The phrase all at once just got me by the gut initially, and it's so good and so interesting. And I think that's something that seems to me Stephen King asked. He would think of something that identifiable, that profound, with such a bigger picture in mind. Can you share for the listener what that is and how that came about? Because it's fascinating.
One of the pleasures of the book was being able to, through my protagonist, because the guy's been alive for thousands of years, was, well, gee, what would he think of our society? What would he think about, modernity? And one of the things I realized is that if you've been alive for thousands of years, nothing changed really. Animals provided transportation and labor, fire provided light, and then all of a sudden, man, after thousands of years of everything being pretty much the same, no air conditioning, no electricity, all of a sudden, boom, modernity comes along. The early 1900s, there's the automobile, electricity, and no one looked back from that. And I needed to give it a name
Mhm.
because I didn't like the word modernity. And I wanted to be able to convey it quickly because it's the all at once, which is our modern society that just exploded from light speed, from this guy's point of view, from automobiles to the internet, from electricity to streaming, smart bombs. It's just crazy how quickly our modern society came about. But our modern society is also an antagonist. So I just had to figure out a name to give it,
Yeah.
and that's the one I figured out.
And what's so interesting about the name and what you're evoking is that we often think of that as a positive thing, all the advances, all the things we can do with our smartphones. And that's true, but your story frames it in a different way, a more foreboding way. And I think that was fascinating. You've been talking, maybe this was on social media. I think you've teased that this is your first and last novel. Is that accurate? And
That's right. Yeah.
why did you say that? And what could change your mind?
Well, I always promised myself I would never write a book, and I've been very fortunate because I've had opportunities to write books in the past, but not fiction. If I could write 99 Reasons CNN Sucks,
Mhm.
and it would be published, and I'm very lucky that way. But it's not something I ever wanted to do because I didn't want to do the work. It's just a lot of work. You've written a book, you know how much work it is. It's a
Yeah.
ton of work, and even though I'm already semi-retired, I just didn't want to do that kind of work. So, but then this story just got under my skin, and I had to write it down. Going back to your first question, just I had to write it. There's nothing I could do. It was like a fever,
Mhm.
and I had to get it down. I had to see, and I never thought I'd finish it, and I never thought it would end up being something I'd be proud of, and I certainly never thought it'd get published. but I had to write it down. And I honestly don't want to go through that again. I don't want to spend if I spend 7 years on the next book, I'll be almost 65 when it's done.
Uh-huh.
And I just don't, I just prefer not to do that kind of work. The other thing is that, and I'm not saying that Borrowed Time is some sort of masterpiece. I'm just saying that within my abilities, within the context of my abilities, I know for a fact this is the best thing I'm ever going to write. And the thought of trying to follow it up is sort of immense.
That's interesting. I had a similar thought about my book. I just thought, this is the best I can do. Whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, whether people love it or hate it, I've reached my cap. So I don't know what else I can do from here. I want to move on to different topics, but one last thing. I'm shocked to hear that you aren't a reader. You don't read fiction, because when I read your book, it feels like you've absorbed so much and was able to tell your story on your terms, but that it was infused with years, if not decades, of reading the great works and reading great stories. Did this whole process, did it make you change the way you review films or see films? I mean, did it make you as a critic maybe change your algorithm or just consider it from a different angle? Because this experience maybe is transformative for you.
No, making my bad movie 15 years ago, that changed the way I reviewed movies. Mm-hmm. But this, no, it not really. This hasn't really. I'm proud of it. I'm happy that it's done. I have no desire to read fiction. I read all the time. I read biography and history. I just find that more interesting than fiction. And but once I decided to write this, then I did start. I think I read about maybe 10 fiction novels to try and get a sense of how you do it.
Yeah.
And then I hired Andrew Klavan's daughter, who's an editor, to look at the first 100 pages. And she did a great job. She sent it back to me with these fantastic notes. And it was like taking a novel writing class just off the notes that she gave me.
Sure. Can we mention her name, by the way? I mean, in case others want to say, I know she often is seeking out.
Faith Klavan.
Yes.
I don't think that's her last. Faith Moore. That's
okay.
right.
Okay.
Faith Moore. But yeah, and she just did a wonder. She helped me out so much, and she got me over the hump. And by the time the book went to the publisher, the people who decided to publish it at Bombardier, there wasn't much left to do. They were pretty happy with the way that it was. So I was very lucky that way too.
Gotcha. It's funny you mentioned Andrew Klavan, or at least summon his spirit, because his books, at least recently, have had a lot of Christian themes in them, but they're never preachy. It never feels like there's a lesson involved here, or like let's stop the story cold to give out a sermon. And I felt the exact same way about your book. I imagine that's harder than you think, because if you have something deep inside, if you are a Christian, if you're a person of faith, it may be hard to corral that, to contain that, to make it in a way where any reader can get something from it, but also not feel like they're in a church pew. Talk about that as well.
Yeah, and Drew is one. I do read his novels, and he wrote a book called Identity Man that helped me enormously with this one. I had the book right next to my keyboard, and every time I got kind of stuck, like, how do you do this? Because Drew he follows the rules, the grammatical rules, like no other writer. He doesn't cheat at all, and he's such a wonderful writer. And his plotting, he's one of the best people at plotting I've ever seen. But to your question, and I wanted to mention that because he's a friend of mine, but to your question, one of the things that I've been doing and you know this better than anyone, for the last 15, 20 years, is I've been yelling at Hollywood because they ruin movies, not because they're left wing, but because when they're left wing in such a ham-handed way, they break the spell. Because all of a sudden you feel the writer or the director coming in and saying, you need to think this about this, or this is the way you need to feel about this, or this is right and this is wrong. And there are some, like Oliver Stone is a brilliant filmmaker. He may be a left-wing filmmaker, but his movies don't do that. And that's why he's so great. But I hate being lectured, and I hate it because it breaks the spell. So one of the things I told myself when I wrote this book is that I was not going to do that. I was going to stick to theme. I was going to stick to character, and I did not want to intrude. The best compliment anyone could give me about this book, and I'm not fishing for it, I'm just answering your question,
Yeah.
is A, you cast a spell, you held me, you didn't lose me. And after I closed the book, I thought about it a little bit. That's all that I want. I don't want to change the world. I don't want to change the way anyone votes. I'm not here to shame anyone, to lecture anyone. I just want to give people what we used to get from pop culture, which was the glory of escape. And that doesn't mean it has to be dumb. It doesn't have to be the Real Housewives to escape. Powerful movies with important ideas and important themes. Movies like Shawshank Redemption. Those, those movies have something to say, but they take you away. And that's the best thing that a story can do, is just take you away. And that was my only goal, was I wanted to turn the reader into a little kid who was saying, and then what happened? And then what happened? That was all I cared about.
Yeah, I think you've done that as well as anyone could do it. And by the way, I think a movie that you and I both enjoy immensely, which I would guess is left-leaning based on the director, was Dead Man Walking by Tim Robbins, because I thought that was a movie that had issues, that maybe had a perspective, but was so good, so nuanced, so layered that you actually could bring a lot of different perspectives out of that. With you could have 6 different people, and I think each could have their own summary of what the story is about. I think that's fascinating. You were kind enough to talk to me about my book, Virtue Bombs, a couple of years ago, and you sounded an optimistic note in a book that was teeming with pessimism, which I can't help it. It's just the way the culture is. But that was 2 years ago when we probably had that conversation. Are you as optimistic that this wave, the woke mind virus, as a certain ex-owner says, is fading a bit, or is it here to stay? I mean, what's your current evaluation? Because I feel good some days and awful other days, and I wonder what your take is.
I think it's just the market is going to fade it. Just alone, what's happened to Disney has to be terrifying the industry, because Disney was bulletproof for 25 years. Going back to the Eisner era. And now Disney is just not just losing money on its movies, but it's openly despised. And Bob Iger just said the other day that we're going to pull out of the culture wars. And I don't know what that means, but that's a surrender. And just the marketplace is doing it. And when you look at the movies that have been hits, like Top Gun Maverick, and everybody says, well, what about Barbie? Barbie's woke. Now, I have not seen Barbie, but from the reviews that I've read, and there are people on the right who like it, it sounds to me like Barbie made people laugh really hard. And I think that's something. Just like Top Gun Maverick, we missed heroes. I think Barbie offers something we haven't had at the movies in a long time, which is to sit with a bunch of people you don't know and enjoy that shared spirit experience of a belly laugh. So I just think the market is going to take care of it, and we just have to hang in there. I knew it was going to take a while, that's for sure. And I think we're in year 6 or 7. And I said, it's going to take 10 years, because these moral panics, and that's what this is, generally last about 10 years. Yeah, McCarthyism, the McMartin daycare thing, that's what this is.
Yeah, moral panic is a great phrase. I know you've used that before. I don't think anyone else has, and it's very applicable. You've been talking about the end of cable TV for a while, wishing it to be, and of course, it's happening now. I don't know how many years they have left. It just seems like it's a dying model. But I'm curious what you think about the streaming wars, because it seems like a revolution. It seems like something that's wonderful for the consumer, all these different choices, all these different options, pretty reasonable price tag. But obviously, we're learning that these streamers are losing money hand over fist, that the status quo can't continue. What do you think is going to happen here, with or without the Hollywood strikes going on or ending?
Yeah, the streamers, the beauty of streaming is that, you and I as consumers, we have options. And the best thing about streaming is that you can say, okay, I'm going to watch everything on Disney. And then 30 or 60 days later, you cancel it. And you say, okay, I'm going to watch everything on Paramount Plus. And then you cancel it. And you can bounce around, and it doesn't cost a lot of money. You can watch everything you want to watch, but you just have to bounce around a little bit. It doesn't cost you a fortune. Whereas cable, it's $150, and if you cancel, you're going to get a cancellation fee, and there's contracts. So it's a very, very different thing. And I know the streamers are losing money, but what's the only way they can make money? They have to make product we want to see. Now, the cable operators didn't have to do that, because they made money whether we watched their channels or not through carriage fees. It was the greatest affirmative action program in the history of big business. Hollywood made literally billions of dollars a month off all these channels that nobody watches, and those days are coming to an end. So now they're going to have to make money based on merit. We have to want to watch their streaming network. And how are they going to do that? They have to create product that we want to watch. Disney's not doing that. That's why they're losing a fortune. They were supposed to be profitable by next year. That's not going to happen because they're just making garbage, and they're in the culture wars, and everybody hates them. The only streamer making money right now is Netflix. Netflix has something for everyone. And these other corporations, they're going to have to do the same thing. They're going to have to make everyone happy.
Yeah, that's some great points there, and it's interesting. And I do exactly what you described. I sign up for a month, I look out for those free trials, and I am all in, and then I'm all out because they just don't have enough content that make me want to stick around. And yet I've been with Netflix and Amazon Prime for quite some time, and I think those are the better venues just because there's so much content. There is some pretty good original fare now and then, and it's enough for me. We've seen in recent weeks a lot of what I'd call right-leaning art, maybe subversive art. The Daily Wire is making stuff right now, movies and TV shows, things like that. Richmond, north of Richmond, try that in a small town. And then conservatives rise up and say, oh, it's happening. We've finally taken back the culture. It feels still more like aberrations than a cultural wave to me. But what's your take on this? And is it conservative, or is there a different label that needs to be applied?
The problem is this, is that you and I and guys like Andrew Klavan and Jeremy Boring at the Daily Wire and people like Alex Marlowe at Breitbart, my boss at Breitbart, my buddy at Breitbart, we are unicorns because we're conservatives who care about the arts. And there just aren't enough of us. And I'll give you a perfect example. And this is not a complaint. People are going to say I'm complaining. I'm not complaining. This is just an example. Mm-hmm. For the book, for Borrowed Time, the publicity people at Bombardier, at Post Hill, they're doing a great job. And they sent out an email, they showed me the list, to about 100 people on the right. Do you want to talk to John Nolte about his new novel? And we got 2 replies.
Oh my God.
Now, if I had written 99 Reasons CNN Sucks, we probably would have gotten 40 or 50 replies. And our side watches pop culture, but the love for the arts, that abiding love that you and I and so few others have, it just isn't there. And that's not a complaint. I'm not criticizing anyone, but it's just the way our side is wired. We're too worried about politics. We love sports. We love hunting. We love other things, but the arts just aren't there. And I just don't see it. Someone could spend a fortune building a website dedicated to the arts, conservative arts, and we're going to review everything that comes out and blah, blah, blah. And you couldn't make any money on it. We tried it at Big Hollywood. And, there's just, people want to talk politics. It's politics on our side. That's what matters to them.
Yeah, I have one wrinkle to that. I think one of the things that's plaguing the right is that they don't understand that you need to have an ecosystem for a great art. It can't just be that John Nolte writes a really good book, Borrowed Time. It's got to be there are outlets to share the news. There are people willing to spread their information on social media. And so without that, your novel could, in theory, get cut off by the knees for that reason. It has nothing to do with the quality. It's just a matter of fact that all these different outlets don't see that as being an essential part of the greater picture. Glenn Beck, I just reported recently, he gave a conversation about he's all in on movies and they're looking to have an incubator system and training tomorrow's storytellers. And I don't know if you can say it or even if it's going to happen, but he should have you on his show and he should promote this book and he should have the conversation, A, because you're a great guest, but B, because it's a really good book and it's a right-leaning book that doesn't shove it in your face. So if he really cares about that from his Blaze Media perch, then that should be a place where you find out about Borrowed Time. So I don't know if it's going to happen, but I think that's just one example of what's happening here. We just don't get it. And by the way, if Michael Moore puts a movie out tomorrow and it stinks on ice, and it probably will because he's a hack, it would get get tons of publicity from Variety and Deadline and all the different websites and all the different outlets. They don't care because they know it's got to get out there into the system. And that's what we're missing on the right, as well as a lot of artists who aren't given the chance. So I think you got on a soapbox. I got on a bigger soapbox. But, you know, one of the things you do so well is you steer people to older films that, you know, maybe people missed the first time around. Hey, this is the pre-woke era. Check this out. Are there any titles? I mean, you could probably rattle off a million of them, but maybe just one or two films that are older, that didn't get a lot of attention, that people can stream right now and say, gosh, that's a good movie.
Yeah, I would. Let's see. I would suggest one movie that came out, I think, in 1996 that I just loved. It's called Beautiful Girls.
Oh.
And that movie just never got the attention it deserved. And I guess now that doesn't feel like an old movie to me, but it is an old movie. 1996 now, it was almost 30 years.
Gosh.
But it's modern enough. I think people will, you know, they're not going to be looking at fedoras and black and white. So
hey, you see?
I think that's another fairly not too old, but somewhat old movie that I love is called Deep Rising. And it's a wonderful, hilarious monster movie that I just never got the love it needed. There's another movie called The Wanderers. I think it came out in '79. Ken Wall stars in that, and it's you know, everybody likes it's a street king movie, but it's just another underrated gem. And I guess the last one I would offer is a movie called The Final Countdown with Kirk Douglas and Martin Sheen, and the plot is ludicrous. The USS Nimitz aircraft carrier goes back in time to Pearl Harbor. And it's a ridiculous premise, but it's so intelligent and it's handled so well. And the movie just sucks you in. So I guess those would be great ones for people to find out, to hunt down.
Yeah, wonderful choices. By the way, my son is 14 and I'm trying to indoctrinate him into movies. It's kind of a tough sell. He likes comedy and horror. But there are two films that I want him to see desperately, but I want him to be a little bit older. I'm thinking between 17 and 20, because I think they'll register at the time. And the two movies are The Graduate, which I don't think he can get right now, but also the other one.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Other one's Beautiful Girls. Those are two movies that I'm dying for him to watch, and I've got him at home. I have to hold back because he's not ready for it yet, and I just want him to be ready to get it as a young man.
So Beautiful Girls, really, you're a fan too.
I love that movie. The cast is exceptional. I mean, if I could go back in time and excise Rosie O'Donnell's role because she's terrible in it, but the rest of the movie is sublime. And you know, I think I resonated with the Timothy Hutton character who goes back to his old town. He's changed, they haven't. He gets back into his old ways to a certain degree. It's so good. And even the subplot involving Natalie Portman, where she's this preteen girl that he has this odd crush on. And it sounds oddly creepy, but as a guy, he sees the woman that she's going to become. He sees that in 10 years, she's going to be beautiful and smart and wise and interesting. And he's enamored with that vision. And I think that's such a sophisticated story that you couldn't tell today. But John, before I let you go, I mention this a lot in the show, and I use the phrase, it keeps me up at night, because it does keep me up at night. I literally think about it at night. The censorship going on in the culture, and it's not just Hollywood, but it's there too, scares me to death. And I think there's at least a kernel of optimism and a faith in America that you have that maybe I sometimes don't have. Do you have sense that this could fade, that American know-how, that pluck, that spirit could make a comeback and stomp this down? Because I don't know if I'm seeing it, or at least in enough quantity to make a difference.
Yeah, the censorship is freaking me out too. And you can ask my wife about that, because I spent all this money going digital. And now that I know that they're going in and stealing your digital copies and editing your digital copy, and if they'll censor The French Connection, they'll censor anything.
Yep.
That's an Academy Award-winning movie. That is a very famous movie. So now I'm going back and I'm buying the discs, which is not cheap either. But I feel like Noah gathering these movies on his ark because of this censorship is going to wipe them out, and that's how much movies mean to me. I don't know what's going to happen with that. I'm hoping. I just think we have to get through this moral panic, and this moral panic is just like it did with McCarthyism. It's just stupidity on ice. I mean, what they censored out of The French Connection, Oh, how it's unbelievable. I mean, they were showing the cops are racist. That's what Friedkin was doing. And you have a problem with that just because of the way they did it. It's just absurd. So I do think we're going to get past this. I don't think we have any choice but to get past it. But if we don't, man, I'm gathering these movies together so that at least someone's got a copy of the originals.
Gotcha. Well, I think we'll have to have a movie night at your house in the future. Huddled down as the last
Yeah,
survivor
beautiful
or something.
girls.
Exactly. Well, John, thank you so much for joining the show one more time. And of course, everyone's got to go pick up Borrowed Time at Amazon or their favorite bookstore. It is excellent. It is thought-provoking. It is fun. It is engaging. And the fact that you end chapters and make you almost impossible not to go to the next chapter. I love that about the book. It's a page turn in the very best sense of the word. And of course, check out John's work at Breitbart News. Pop culture, media corruption, you name it, it's there. And John's writing is just top notch. I've been following him since the Dirty Harry blog, and you've only gotten better since then. Best of luck with the book, John. And I'm still holding out hope you've got another book in you, but we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it very much, buddy. It's always good to talk to you.
That's another bonus episode in the books. I've been interviewing a lot of really cool, fascinating people lately, so expect to hear more bonus episodes in addition to our weekly show. In between, I hope you subscribe to the Hollywood in Toto podcast, the right take on entertainment, and get every killer conversation. And please visit HollywoodinToto.com. It's open 7 days a week. No woke, just a nonstop celebration of free speech. That's how the counterculture rolls these days. See you next time.